Our gospel lesson this morning says that as Jesus and the disciples came out of the big temple in Jerusalem, one of the disciples, who at that moment was probably just turning around to look back at this huge building, this huge temple that they just had come out of, he says to Jesus, "What huge stone. What a massive building." I remember when I was 12 years old and for the very first time visited New York City. And I remember our family walking along Fifth Avenue, and I just had to stop periodically to just kind of look up at the skyscrapers on each side. I was just amazed by that. Well, this gospel lesson is the first time that Jesus and the disciples visit Jerusalem, the capital city of Israel. At least in Mark's gospel, it's the first time. They've just come out of their home territory of Galilee. And back up in Galilee, in most of the villages, the tallest building anyone would ever see would be a two-story house, not made mostly out of mud blocks. And so here they are in Jerusalem for the first time, looking at the temple. And the temple was an incredibly huge building. It was undoubtedly the largest building in the whole country of Israel. In fact, it was well known throughout the Roman Empire, the splendor of this temple that King Herod had built. And so the disciples are just amazed at what a massive building it is. We know that the walls of Herod's temple were 150 feet high. The walls were about 40 feet wide. The wall, probably from that window to that window, is about 40 feet. The walls were 40 feet wide. The whole inside of the eastern wall of the temple was plated in gold, and the entry doors into the temple itself were 45 feet high. If there was ever a building that would lead someone to say, "This place will stand forever," it was certainly that kind of a temple with huge walls and massive thick walls. But it's just at that point that Jesus says to his disciples, "Don't be too sure about that," he says. "Don't be too sure about that." He said, "In fact, the days are coming when this temple will come down. The days are coming when not one stone will stand upon another. The days are coming when Jerusalem itself will be flattened." Jesus spoke those words in about the year 30 AD, as we think of it, about 30 AD, just before his crucifixion. 40 years later, they came true. In the year 70 AD, the Romans sent their army to destroy Jerusalem. The Israelites had rebelled 3 times against the Roman rulers within a very short time. They had refused to pay their taxes for over a year. Rome was enraged, and so they sent this massive army, complete with the catapult machines that you see in the old movies. And they totally took the temple apart, stone from stone. There's just one wall remaining that you see in the news all the time, the Wailing Wall. But they also leveled most of Jerusalem, so the people of Jerusalem had nowhere to live, and they began the dispersion, the running away to all the other countries around the Mediterranean area. Not one stone will stay standing upon another. The thing is, Jesus doesn't stop there. It actually gets worse. He goes on to say to the disciples, "There will be wars and rumors of wars. There will be earthquakes and famines, and nation will rise against nation." It sounds terrible. It sounds terrible. Unfortunately, it sounds like our evening news every day. But then Jesus says something important. It's the most important, the most fascinating line in the whole gospel lesson. He talks about all this turmoil, all this chaos, everything being turned upside down. And then he says to them, "But don't be afraid, for these are the beginning of birth pangs." What does Jesus mean by that? Or another way of asking it, who is giving birth here? And what's in the process of being born? And I think that what Jesus is talking about, he's trying to help the disciples see things in a whole new way. He wants them to look at their own lives, to see what walls, what foundations they're basing their lives on. But he also wants them to see how God is at work, even in the midst of the greatest turmoil, how God is at work bringing something new into existence. One way we can picture what Jesus is talking about, both to his disciples and to us, if we're here in this text this morning, what he's saying to us, is to think of Jesus as a physician. You go to the doctor's office, you're not feeling so well, You ask the doctor to run some tests and do a diagnosis, and the doctor comes back to you with both good news and bad news. That's often some of the both. In this case, Jesus does come back with some bad news, or at least I would say very challenging news, and also some good news. And the challenging news is that he wants his disciples and he wants us to think about what do we count on? What are the foundations? What are the structures? Like that massive temple in Jerusalem that everybody assumed would last forever. What do we build our lives on that we really count on to hold us and to keep us strong, keep our lives meaning? In Jesus' time, it was the temple and the family that were the true structures that really supported people. What do we count on? What do we count on to make us happy, to keep us safe, to give our life meaning? Last night, I was pinning some of the hopes for my life on the Oregon Ducks. I'm actually a Washington Husky fan, but since they're out of it, I pinned my hopes on the Oregon Ducks. If they could stay number one, if they could get to the national playoffs, if they could be number one, I thought life would be better. I would be happy. That foundation crumbled. But what is it in a more meaningful way, perhaps? What do we build our lives on? Well, we too, like the people in Jesus' day, we base our life on our family. If we have a good family, a strong family, we are sure that we will be happier, and that is a big key to it. We base our life on our jobs. We invest ourselves into our jobs, into our income, into developing some measure of economic security, into our reputations. We base our life on the strength of our nation, on our health. And those are all good things. It's not a bad thing to really count on those real practical, concrete things of family and jobs and national health and our own health. In fact, Jesus even teaches us to pray for those things and to look at those things as gifts of God. So those are not at all the wrong kinds of things to invest ourselves in. But what Jesus is saying to us today is saying, as important as they are secondary because they always have the capacity of crumbling. They always have the capacity of coming apart stone by stone. And so Jesus says, what you really got to build your life on, what you really got to have as your foundation is God. Nothing lasts but God. A family, even the best family, can go through some rough days, some hard days when it seems like it's falling apart. Our jobs in this economy never seem quite as secure as they might have 20 years ago, 30 years ago. Our health has ups and downs. The whole national scene. I feel frightened when I read the news about yet another face-off between Gaza and Jerusalem these days and how that could inflame the whole area and involve us too. Jesus is saying, like a very honest physician, saying, look, what do you stake your lives on? What do you count to be the key to your happiness? What do you invest yourselves in? Take care. They may be good things, but they can crumble. They can crumble. And so finally, more than anything else, set yourself on God. Root yourself on God. A God who comes to embrace you, comes to care for you. Trust in that God. That is the center of your life.